This is Jennifer Gonzalez welcoming you to episode 9 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, I talked to James Sturtevant, author of the book You've Got to Connect, Building Relationships That Lead to Engaged Students, Productive Classrooms, and Higher Achievement. We talk about how important it is to build relationships with your students, what gets in the way of the process for many teachers, and some really useful tips for exactly how to do it. Before we get into the interview, I'd like to ask that if you've been listening to the podcast for a few episodes and you're enjoying it, take a moment to go over to iTunes and give us a rating, a review, or both. That will really help the show move up in the iTunes rankings, and it'll bring us more listeners who can benefit from the really interesting conversations I'm getting to have with people about teaching and learning. Also, if you have questions about teaching, parenting, or learning in general, go to cultofpedagogy.com/ask and send me your question. You can send a regular email or do a voice recording, which I prefer. And if the topic is something other listeners would relate to, and I think a lot of things would, I'll answer it in a future podcast. Okay, one last thing. Here's your teaching tip for this episode. Physically rehearse classroom procedures. If there is something physical in your room that students do, and it's something that is not going well, it takes a lot of time. For example, the way they turn papers in. Maybe it always ends up getting very messy. Or for me personally, one thing that consumed a lot of time was getting students from sitting in their normal seats to getting arranged into groups for cooperative activities. So I got this tip in general from Harry Wong's book, The First Days of School, but I didn't really believe fervently in it until I tried it myself. So the tip is have the students physically rehearse these types of procedures, and this is how you do it. I'm going to use the example of getting into groups. I told students we're going to take the next 15 minutes in this class period today to practice something. We're going to decide right now where the tables are going to go, where the desks are going to go when we go from rows to groups. And so the first time we do it, it's going to probably take us forever because I'm going to show you exactly where to move your desk and where you to move your desk. And it's going to take us a while to get them in place. And then we'll move them back into rows. And we'll time and see how long that goes. But once everybody's clear, then we're going to try it again. So the first time we did it, it took about 3 or 4 minutes to get all the desks arranged in the right way and to sort of choreograph how that was going to go. Then I said, okay, let's put them back into rows. This time we're going to time ourselves. I think maybe the first time I didn't even time them. I'm going to time you how long it takes. And so the first time I really timed them, it took about maybe a minute. Okay. And they all thought that was terrible. They thought it took way too long, and some kids were yelling at each other. And, I said, the next time we rehearse this, there can be no yelling. I want you to do it silently. You're going to have to use hand gestures or whatever. And the next time they did it, it took maybe 25 seconds. And then we would also time them getting back into rows. How quickly could they move the desks into the groups, and then how quickly could they move them back into rows? So anyway, every time we did this, they got more and more motivated, and they got really proud of themselves for how quickly they could do this and how seamlessly they could do it. And so every time they said, we can beat our time, we can beat our time. This was middle schoolers. We got it down to about 12 seconds from sitting in rows to standing up, moving the desk, and sitting back into those desks. It was amazing. It was really fun. They were so excited by it. And I realized you could do this with pretty much anything in class, anything that involves physical movement of things. You can time it. And we got to the point where if we had to do something that was group work, I would say to them, okay, let's see how quickly you can do it. And we would start the timer, and they would do it. And there were always little kinks here and there, but it turned something that was kind of mundane and kind of a big time waster into something that was really fun and ended up being really fast. So keep that in mind. If there's some sort of logistical issue in your class that you think could be smoother, figure out a way to rehearse that with your students. So we're done with that. Let's go. Here is my interview with a teacher who is definitely worth your time, James Sturtevant. Welcome, James Sturtevant. James is my guest. He has written a book that was just published this year, and it is called You've Got to Connect, Building Relationships That Lead to Engaged Students, Productive Classrooms, and Higher Achievement. And I have read his book, and I love it. I think that it would make such a good subject for a group study. And really, I'm guessing that there probably are books about this somewhere out there, but I don't know what they are, and I haven't seen them. So my take on the book is that it is about how important it is to build relationships with your student, and how that really is the basis of pretty much everything else that you can do with them. So I'm going to pass it over to James. First of all, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Oh, Jennifer, my pleasure. Love it.
And I would like, if we could just start, if you could just sort of give, for the sake of our listeners, what is your overall message with this book?
Okay, very good. It's funny, I think that every educator probably wants the same thing for their students. Hopefully they do, at least. Mm-hmm. They want to do well on standardized tests, succeed at the college level, compete with young people around the world, and find happiness. But here's what I believe. I believe that all those things are so much more possible, so much more likely if there's a strong bond between teachers and students. And that's why I wrote this book. And you know, I have sat all day in professional development, so I might be totally primed for this question. But we focus so much on the manufacturing process of learning, so much on content and pedagogy, and those things are really important. But ultimately, this is a people business, and we can't lose sight of that.
Fantastic. That was really well put. And you're right. There is a lot of attention on the mechanics of this and how to sort of refine the teaching. And when you don't have the relationships, you kind of, a lot of that doesn't even matter.
Hey, I want to add one thing to that. I wrote this book. It was published in March, and a local superintendent read the book, and he was very enthusiastic about it. So he calls me up and he says, I want you to become familiar with a man called John Hattie, who wrote a landmark book called Professional Learning, which came out in 2008, which many of your audience is probably familiar with. And the heart of this book is a list of 138 influences on student learning. Mm-hmm. And number one on the list was students being allowed to evaluate their own work. In other words, students do really well when you give them the rubric and you say, go through your assignment and see how you did. And I've seen this at work.
Yeah.
Number 138 is student mobility, kids that move from school to school. I've seen that too. Child moves into my class in October and she's gone in November. That's devastating for a child's education.
Yeah.
Student-teacher relationships is number 11 out of 138. And it's far ahead of a lot of things that we might think are more important. Professional development scores number 19, which is high. It's what I did all day today. But many people would be shocked to learn that student-teacher relationships is in front of that. I think socioeconomic status, the socioeconomic status of the child is at 32nd place. That's a long way down the list.
Yeah.
So there's just, that was a real eye-opener to me, and it was an affirmation of what I did, and it's kind of one of those things like you have a conversation with someone and you wish you would have added something, but you forgot to. Yeah. I wish I would have known about John Hattie's work before I wrote the book.
Well, you know, I'm going to be linking people to your book on my show notes for the podcast, and I will find that book and I'll link them to that also so that they can
I can give you his little website.
Okay, that would be great. I'm sure he would love to be added to this conversation. The thing is, I think it's good that somebody is finally kind of bringing this out into the open, because I'm not sure how much research has actually been done on the importance of these relationships.
Well, if I could add one more thing to that, it's kind of interesting. I think it's becoming more prevalent. I'm from the state of Ohio, and Ohio is a pretty typical state. I like to tell people from outside the state that I live in the most average state in the United States.
That's how I think of Ohio, too.
It's a wonderful place to come if you want to do a focus group. I think I've been in 4 of them. Uh-huh. And the state of Ohio has determined that this is very important, which I give our state a lot of credit for. We have a program for young teachers called the Resident Education Program, which I'm sure a lot of states have. But I have a quote here. Let's see if I can find it. Resident educators have to go through a pretty lengthy process to demonstrate their abilities in the classroom, which is important. But one of the areas of focus is, and I'm quoting right from the Ohio Department of Education website, teachers will be required to show that they build relationships with students by establishing and maintaining rapport. They value each student as an individual while avoiding the use of biased stereotypes and generalizations. I was so impressed with that. Yeah. So the state of Ohio is saying that this is very important, and if Ohio's doing it, I guarantee you other people are as well.
Yeah, it's nice that that's actually written into the language now.
Yeah, they have to prove it. They have to prove that they do it.
Wow.
And I've worked some with resident educators, and a lot of them do it intuitively, but they don't realize what they're doing, and a lot of them need some work there.
Yes. So that actually leads me right into this next piece. I've underlined so many things in your book that I thought one good way to frame a part of our conversation would be for me to just tell you what some of those were and have you elaborate on some of those points that you made. So the first one that really stood out to me was this one on page 43. It says, identify nostalgic ideas that keep you from accepting students. And it was the first time I'd ever seen anybody call teachers out on the nostalgia problem and name it that. I had never even thought of it that way, but gosh, it's a huge problem. So go ahead and talk about that.
Sure. A big part of my message is you have to just learn to accept your students. And that's really hard to do, man, because a lot of times people equate acceptance with endorsement, which is really unfortunate. If you accept your kids, you just have a firm grasp on reality, which is always the same way to go. It doesn't mean that you have to get something pierced, get a tattoo, or wear yoga pants all day long, which I think would be pretty comfortable.
Yeah.
But one of the big barriers is people tend to pine for the good old days. And I'm not talking about just old people like me. I was walking out of school one day, and I was walking with a colleague who was in her late 20s, and she was complaining about student behavior in the parking lot. And I thought to myself, now wait a minute, I had you in class just about 10 years ago. Everybody in your class acted the same way. So, I have to, I have something here that's just wonderful. And I hope I can find it real quick. It's a quote. Oh, here it is. Jennifer, you're going to love this. I see no hope for the future of our people if they are dependent on the frivolous youth of today. For certainly all youth are reckless beyond words. When I was a boy, we were taught to be discreet and respectful of elders. But the present youth are exceedingly wise and impatient of restraint. Now, I think your audience can probably sense some irony coming. This was Hesiod, the poet of ancient Greece, in 700 BCE.
Oh, goodness.
And that's 200 years prior to Athens' golden age. So if you recognize that generation gaps are always there, and they can just be this huge barrier between you and your kids, and they happen really fast. I've heard student teachers complain about the way kids are acting, and it's just like, you aren't that much older than these folks. And it's funny, when I do some presenting, when I work with groups, one of the things I have them do is I have them make a list of everything about the present generation that they find distasteful. Now, I love kids, I love my job, I love connecting with kids. I had no problem compiling that list.
Right.
It filled up immediately.
Yeah.
And then I challenge the audience to go through, and you need to eliminate everything that you probably don't have a lot of control over.
Right.
And what I find is that their list just dwindles down to almost nothing. And often these things that we eliminate are the things that we complain about the most. So if you can recognize those things like generation gaps that you have no control over, you can eliminate those from your aggravation list.
Yeah.
You can do a lot to connect with kids.
Yeah, I think, and there was something else in that section that, and I didn't write down the page number, but you were talking about how a lot of people who go into teaching were good students themselves.
Yeah.
And so we don't necessarily we didn't hang out with the academically uninclined. We may not have run in the same circles with them, may not have shared classes with them. So it could be that a lot of these teachers who have this nostalgia really don't know what it was like back then, because those weren't the kids they hung out with, and now they have to deal with everybody.
You're a good reader. You do well on retention. That's outstanding. Yes, one of the biggest benefits I had was I was kind of a slacker in high school, which
It's a bonus.
It's finally paying off. Another thing that I do when I present is the Germans have this word called Weltanschauung, which means worldview. Mm-hmm. And a typical German word is really long. They just take a bunch of English words and slam them together and make one word. And so, I asked the audience, put up your hand if you graduated from high school with over a 3.0. Almost everybody puts their hand up. Put your hand up if you played a varsity sport. A lot of people put their hands up. Put up your hand if you were in the National Honor Society. Remarkably, there's a lot of people that put up their hand on all three occasions. Mm-hmm. And that, unfortunately, can be a real barrier between them and the students that are not motivated because they just don't understand their worldview, their Weltanschauung.
Right. So how can a teacher like that, which describes a lot of teachers, how can they understand these kids?
That's a great question. And here's the way I'm going to answer that. I taught in a class back in the dawn of my teaching career that was nothing like me. I'm a white dude. Almost all of them were African American. They were mostly poor. They had very little interest in what I was teaching, which was ninth grade civics, which most people don't have much interest in. And, I really struggled with them. I struggled connecting with them. Everything I tried with kids before wasn't working with them. And I had a eureka moment. One day I was just I was listening in on a conversation with a couple of kids talking about their home lives, which were just chaotic. And, I finally came to the conclusion it's a rational action on those kids' part to be standoffish towards me, because here I am, another adult trying to work my way into their lives, and many of the adults have been pretty irresponsible. Mm. And from that moment on, and this is a great piece of advice I could give anyone, I just relaxed more. And I took each one of these interactions with these kids kind of like this interesting game in which I was this kind of removed observer. And once you pull your ego out of things like that, the interactions between people become this interesting game and fun. And I'm not saying that I don't have an ego. I mean, I probably have one that would lay waste to Tokyo. But I've learned that it can be a real obstacle in terms of connection. And I have to learn that over and over again. But I would say for those teachers like that, if they could recognize that that's a barrier, remove their ego, and then just kind of watch as an objective observer their interesting interactions with kids, they'll go light years.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's
It's fun, and it's fun to do that.
If you can just pull away just a little bit and almost go outside the situation as an observer. I do. I think taking things personally can wreak havoc on a classroom if the teacher is in that mind space. So,
and I don't want to come off as too zen-like. I have to do this on a daily basis. I have to remind myself of this all the time. I mean, I am not above allowing my ego to mess things up.
Right, but see, I think part of it is knowing that that's what's going on. It can help you snap yourself out of it maybe a little faster than if you didn't understand the mechanism behind it.
True that.
So, okay, so here's another one. Here's another quote. This is just a few pages down. This is one of the questions where you're asking the teacher to sort of do a little self-study of their attitudes towards students. And I thought this was such an interesting question. You said, how often do you show approval of a certain student in a way that clearly suggests disapproval toward other students?
Yeah. Oh, my gosh.
That dynamic, I don't know if many people ever have that pointed out to them, how damaging that can be.
Yeah, and I again, some of writing this book was, I don't know, therapy, because you have to guard against this yourself all the time. I'll tell you, a lot of things that I learned in connecting with kids were obviously mistakes I've made. I want to tell you about a success, and this was going along with what you're just talking about right now. Mm-hmm. I actually enjoy working with student teachers, and I had a really good one a few years back. And he was a kid. I live in Central Ohio, Otterbein University, small liberal arts college, just right down the road. They sent up a guy. He was this really good-looking dude, a football player, He comes walking in the first day, and automatically the girls are like, whoa, this is a massive upgrade from Mr. Sturtevant. And so they were all on board. And I had a lot of athletes in class, and they were drawn to this guy. But there was a handful of kids, not more than 5. But, that's a significant minority. And they were thinking, oh, boy, we got another jock social studies teacher. Why do they keep doing this to us?
Yeah.
And so I pulled them aside pretty early on. Actually, I think the first day, and I said, I can teach you the content. We can talk about lesson plans and all that stuff. It's easy. The hard part is building a relationship with those kids that are standoffish. And so we went to work on that very thing that you said. And, there are all kinds of ways in which you can reach out to those kids, in which you can show approval to those kids. And you're probably going to meet with some resistance, which might be resistance for some time, and you just have to be patient and keep working at it. Pull your ego out, look at things as an observer, and over time, winning over those kids will be a great accomplishment for you, but more importantly, wonderful for those young people.
Yeah. Now, was he doing that? Was he doing some of this sort of complimenting certain kids for certain qualities, and then?
Yeah, I think yes, and I think as a 22-year-old guy coming up here who's used to a lot of affirmation, you're going to be drawn to the people who seem receptive to you.
Right.
So I the good news for everyone concerned is Charlie, who teaches right across the hall from me, is a perceptive individual. And when I told him this stuff, he thought, game on, man. That sounds like a lot of fun. Let's see if we can win him over. So he was a lot more mature than I was when I was 22 years old. I probably would have had my ego screw that situation up.
So one of the other messages in here, we're getting a little closer to the end of the book, is you say embrace the class clown.
Oh yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, I like to think that I was a class clown. Well, I was a class clown, and I enjoy class clowns, and but they can be very disruptive, and they can be, I don't know, they can just throw you off your game and just poison the well and just undermine everything. And there's a couple things that you have to do with class clowns. You have to be careful that they aren't abusive to other students. You have to quell the sarcasm, which is poison in a classroom. You have to do those things. But whenever you reprimand a class clown or redirect a class clown or discipline a class clown, you have to make it your mission to develop a relationship with that kid. And if you can do that, you will be amazed at how their humor becomes less destructive and actually adds to the atmosphere in your classroom. And boy, does that take you taking your ego out of it and just chilling out and just being patient and just going with things. But you need to be persistent in, hey, how you doing? What's going on? What'd you have for dinner last night? What's the last movie you saw? You have to make an effort to develop a relationship with that kid. And they might not allow that to happen very quickly. They might give you a rough road to go for a long time, but you're the adult. Come on, man.
Right. Boy, I think about that a lot. You're the adult. So it sounds like you're saying you develop the relationship with the class clown at times when they are not attempting to disrupt the class.
Right. Yeah. And yes, definitely. I mean, you have to maintain order, and there's times you have to come down on kids, and you have to, because you have to. Teaching is an important job. But whenever that happens, that's when the work begins. That's when the work begins. Okay, I got on him or I got on her today. Now I need to, pat him on the back some. Now I need to develop that relationship. And I'll tell you what, I've been through. This is year number 30 for me. I've been through a lot of kids.
Yeah.
There's just a handful, I'd say, that I'm sure, come on, there's thousands of kids that have come through this door. I'm sure that some of them didn't care for me, but I can think of a lot of students who were standoffish, like my student teacher's situation that I won over. And you can, if you just keep your ego out of it and be persistent, friendly, be friendly, be a friendly person, and things will work out. Just be interested in kids.
Yeah, that's really key. And I was going to ask you about some of the actual how-tos in terms of the
Oh,
connecting.
sure.
Just be
I'll give
interested
you.
in them. And yeah, go ahead.
I'll give you a great how-to. This is interesting. Teachers are often lectured, get to know your students.
Yes.
That's not easy to do. A lot of them can be pretty closed down, and if you try to get to know them before they're ready, that can be counterproductive.
Mm-hmm.
So I propose reverse engineering the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to become familiar to my students. And one of the ways I do that is I tell stories about myself.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say this to people, I immediately get this response. Well, you're going to take away instructional time, or that would be ridiculous. My kids would look at me like I'm an idiot. But you have to understand that in this online generation, they inform their peers constantly about trivial things. They tell everybody whom they're attracted to, what television shows they watch. They post massive photo albums of themselves constantly online.
Mm-hmm.
So if you walk in and put up an image of what you made for dinner last night on your smartboard, or if you come in and put up an image of your dog getting a toenail trim, or you put up an image of a before and after picture of your last haircut, or where you like to work out, or a great restaurant you went to, you will have students come up to you after that have never spoken to you and say, guess what I had for dinner? Let me show you a picture of my dog. Guess where we went to eat last night? And all of a sudden you become approachable, familiar, interesting, and then you can start to learn about them. So if you're having a hard time with kids, one thing you can do is just become more approachable. You can tell some stories about yourself. Now you have to be prepared, because when you do this, you might have a student in the front row say, this is stupid. What's this have to do with social studies?
Yeah.
They don't speak for everybody. There's a lot of kids that are in the back thinking, wow, this is pretty interesting. So just because that one child voices that, I don't know, that negative comment doesn't mean that they speak for everyone.
Yeah.
And also you've just identified the person that you probably need to work on your relationship.
Right. So what do you say in that moment, though, to that one kid?
Well, that's where you just have to be the adult. You have to say, well, I'm just trying to share a little bit about my life, and maybe I can learn some more about you in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a pretty non-threatening way to diffuse the situation, and then you move on. I've had that happen to me, but it doesn't prevent me from doing it in the future. And I'll tell you what, when that's happened, a lot of times that kid that complained is the one that's up there telling you about their dog.
No, well, because it's probably making the strongest impression on them.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
That answer surprised me, though, when I asked you what you would say to them. I was really expecting that you would say something about humor, because you emphasize humor a lot. And I think it's interesting that you went with a more sort of sincere approach, which sincerity can be very disarming to a kid who's trying to get a rise out of you.
Well, there's a reason for that. Is because that is a classic setup for a sarcastic statement right there.
Yeah.
And boy, I'll tell you what, if you talk about a vice that a lot of educators have, it's sarcasm. Mm-hmm. And like most vices, at the time it feels really good. The after effects, unsavory, man. And something else you have to understand is, let's say that I witnessed this one time in a college class. A kid didn't have their homework assignment, and the teacher made a flippant, sarcastic remark, which the kid immediately responded in kind. And I thought to myself, that wasn't smart at all, man, because number one, you created this confrontational atmosphere in your class.
Yep.
And number two, you probably reinforced a lot of the insecurities this kid already had about himself. And, granted, he gave some cocky, flippant response back.
Yeah.
But underneath that, he might be going, oh my gosh, maybe it's true. I am stupid, or I am irresponsible.
Yeah.
So in your response to that kid maybe saying that about my little story, I'd be very careful not to respond back with humor in that circumstance.
Right. I'm learning even more than I learned from your book now, and I think that that's fantastic. Sarcasm really, it comes up quite a bit actually in your book. So
yeah, it's really, and I'm not saying I haven't done it.
Right.
I'm saying that it's never ended well.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. It's tempting, and yeah. Okay, so I've got another question, because you talk a lot about smiling in the book, about using humor and telling stories. And I'm thinking that if anybody has an objection to this book, it's going to be somebody who reads it and says, no way, that's weak, that shows weakness, the kids are going to run all over you if you're smiling all the time. That's not my personality. So what would you say to those objections?
That's a good question. Let me answer that in a couple pieces here.
Okay.
One of the pushbacks I get with this book when you talk about personality is, well, Jim, you're an extroverted guy. You're one of those backslappers, high fivers, handshakers, finger pointers. You're one of those guys. And I am one of those guys. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of teachers who are introverted, who are incredibly successful at connecting with students. So when people say, well, you're either born with this or you're not,
right.
One of my big mantras is, true. I mean, personality is important, but a lot of connecting is what you do, not who you are. We have a lady in the guidance office. I teach at a place called Big One High School. Mm-hmm. So 10 years ago, this woman came to our school, and she's the opposite of me. She's an introvert. She's a quiet person. She's very calm, and she's not a very big person. And I remember when she first came to our school, I thought, oh boy, I wonder if she's going to struggle corralling these high school kids.
Yeah.
And she did at first. But what I witnessed with her over the 10 years is she started to do the right things with kids. And she was a very genuine person. She was a very available person, and a very encouraging person, and a very thorough person, and a very serious about her curriculum. And what I saw, she just went in the guidance office last year. Her name's Jeannie Collette. By the time she went into guidance, she was the most popular person on our staff. And I talk about her wherever I go because she's the total opposite of me. So it's not, connecting with students is not contingent on being a game show host or a Walmart greeter. You can be a very serious, calm, quiet person and really connect with kids. And boy, that's important. Now, as far as getting walked all over, just because, there's an old saying, don't let them see you smile till Thanksgiving. Remember that?
Right. Oh, yeah.
Really? I mean, I heard something funny. I said, people who don't smile much till Thanksgiving probably don't smile much after Thanksgiving.
No kidding. Yeah.
I mean, really? So, when I was in high school back in the 1970s, I mean, they whacked you with boards. I mean, that was barbaric. I'm telling you right now, in my evolution as a teacher, students are not very easily intimidated these days.
Yeah.
When I first started teaching back in the 1980s, some of the male teachers acted like, barroom bouncers, and they got away with it.
Yeah.
You can't get away with that anymore. I mean, if you come in and try to be a tough guy, and all of a sudden some kid calls you on it, then what? So then you're stuck.
Right.
So I think that, as long as you have firm boundaries and expectations, you can be a friendly person and a humorous person. I don't think that's an issue at all.
So, well, let's talk about that, because you later on in the book, I wrote this down. I have no problem confronting students in these circumstances because such behaviors are totally inappropriate. In the book, you do come across very humorous and very relaxed and very friendly. So what does it look like when you are confronting a kid for a real problematic behavior? What does that actually look like?
That actually looks like you have to stop this right now, and if you don't, I have to go get an administrator, and if that doesn't work, we got to get the police.
Okay.
And there's not a conversation. There are times when a student is being dangerous, and that's just point A or point B, man. That's Pat. Then we can work on the relationship later. I gotta make sure you're not gonna hurt somebody. So yeah, I can be a very direct person.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you on that. There was a little more directness in my manuscript, and my editor was tone some of that down some.
Huh.
So that's kind of interesting that you brought that up, because there was like, for instance, in the use of the word warm demander. Do you remember that
Yep.
phrase?
Absolutely. Yep.
The editor did not like the word demander much,
Oh.
which I didn't really think was an issue, but
The editor made you say that you didn't like it, though.
yeah,
Oh, no.
I was forced to include that.
Oh. Well.
So we had a little disagreement on that, but she's awesome, man. I mean, heck, she pulled my manuscript out of the haystack. Who am I to complain?
It's a good phrase. I mean, it's a real juxtaposition.
Yeah, it is. It is. You're right. And my wife is one.
She's a warm demander.
Big time.
That's a skill, man. You have to either have an excellent role model who's already doing it, or.
But it's kind of interesting that you say that, because when I do go to present, one of the things that I have the audience do is I have them describe their warm demander from their past, and I get a lot of fourth grade teachers. I get a bunch of fourth grade teachers. That must be a real formative time in the kid's life.
Yeah, but
I like things like the angel and the devil, on your shoulder. You got your warm angel and your demanding devil sitting on both shoulders, talking to you.
Yeah. So remembering that person for the people in these groups, does that sort of help them create a role model in their mind?
Sure. And then I always challenge them to go contact that person if they're still alive.
Yeah.
And it can lead to some really good dialogues, man. But yeah, I think it puts you in the right mindset that, heck yeah, there are role models in my past that I'd like to emulate. Now, that doesn't mean you have to become them, but...
Right.
I mean, I certainly I can remember some football coaches that I thought really inspired me, but were demanding. I had some college professors like that. I think I had a fourth grade teacher like that.
So if you have one hope, or sort of like a final message, something that you really hope that everyone comes away from this book with, what would be the one big final message?
Sure, man. I'm telling you, with the whole accountability craze in education, and there's some good in it. The whole testing, I don't know, mania that's going on. Teaching, like I said before, is a people business. Should also be a lot of fun. And when you're interacting with people that you like, that you bond with, you hold each other accountable, you enjoy being around them on a daily basis, that's what makes life worth living. And this is a wonderful job, and it should be a lot of fun. I saw something that about half the teachers get out of the profession within 5 years.
Yep.
Are you familiar with that?
Oh, yeah.
It's hard for me to believe that those 50% have wonderful relationships with their students.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to believe that I think if you have great relationships with your kids, you'll be inclined to stay. Mm-hmm. So I think that this is darned important. I mean, obviously, I wrote the book. Wasn't on my bucket list. It just kind of happened. I said I should write a book on this. So that's what happened. And I wish we would focus more on it in the profession. And not that we shouldn't focus on pedagogy and content. I mean, listen. I mean, I love the title of your podcast, by the way. But it needs to be considered as important. How's that?
Oh, yeah, I agree.
Connecting with students needs to be considered as important, because you might have fabulous ideas on what to do, but if that relationship isn't there, you're not going to succeed.
And you could ruin all the best ideas by having a bad relationship with your kids. Yeah.
I mean, didn't you have some teachers back in school that you just loved, that maybe weren't the greatest teacher, but you just wanted them to succeed so badly? Well, yeah. Think of somebody who really has their act together from a curriculum standpoint, and can succeed on top of that. Boy, that's an outstanding combination.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jim, tell us, where can people find you if they're looking on social media or online? Well,
my name is problematic for many. So it's James Allen. That's ALAN Sturtevant. STUR, T as in Thomas, E, V as in Victor, ANT. JamesAllenSturtevant.com.
Okay.
or my book's available on Amazon and Kindle and all that. And I do have a website, which is kind of strange. It has some odd things on it. But, I really enjoy interacting with people. And anybody that sends me an email, it's pjsturtevant@gmail.com.
Okay.
P as in Penny, that's my wife's name. J as in James, pjsturtevant@gmail.com. I'll get back to you.
Thank you so much for giving me this time. I know you're in school, so I appreciate it so much. And
I got the door locked.
got people banging on the door.
So we'll just see how long that lasts.
I am so grateful to James for sharing his insights with us. For more information on his book, go to the resources menu on cultivepedagogy.com, click books, and you'll find it. Thanks for listening and have a great day.